Ewen, Jenny's ready to start. So, Jenny, welcome. Welcome. We're so excited about your talk. I just sent Jenny a message to say that we do not have any plant-based nutritionists here in China. And Jenny is a qualified plant-based nutritionist. Her background is that she was a research librarian, I believe, at one of the universities. And many years ago, she transplanted herself to become plant-based, much like my friend Ewen here.
Hi.
Ewen's originally from Brisbane.
Yeah, grew up in Brisbane, originally from Taiwan. Yeah.
And Ewen went through the same thing. She also is a plant-based professional. She's like me. Just quickly,
Yeah, so I'm based in Shanghai. I'm a plant-forward whole foods chef educator. So I teach about food and health and food and sustainability. And I'm also part of the global network of eco chefs called Chefs Manifesto that work towards all the SDGs set by the UN, but particularly SDG 2, zero hunger. So, you know, using biodiverse ingredients, reducing food waste, plant forward, all these actions.
So Ewen and I are going to give you the class tomorrow morning from 10 o'clock. We're going to be looking at salad dressings, but really we're just doing that as we're going to be talking to you, and you can get to know Ewen. And Ewen has invited some of her friends, and they
always cook together. And
they're also plant-based people. And this is really important because just before we hand over to Jenny, Jenny hopefully will explain after she's given her talk to tell us more about what she does and the work that she and Malcolm have done to create a plant-based community in Australia, which is really, really important, because if we want to go plant-based, it can be a very lonely sort of
community is very important.
You need community. And what we're having tonight is we're having a plant-based meal together while we're listening to Jenny, and we're hoping that this can all get going. So with no more further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jenny. As you may know, last week we had Dr. Malcolm Mackay gave us a fabulous talk, and Jenny is his partner. She works with him in Melbourne, and they run plant-based retreats, and they do quite a number of things. So I will just hand over to Jenny. Jenny, instead of asking questions or anything, I'm going to mute myself, and if everybody could mute yourselves, and just Jenny stay. Okay, over to you, Jenny.
I'll begin with just a little bit of, I've just got to find my talk and share. Hopefully you can now see my screen. I'll just get the PowerPoint onto full screen. Take a moment. Okay, and put that up there. So just what I'm talking about tonight is a calorie density approach to weight management. But I'll just begin with a little chat about who I am and what I do. I spent most of my adult life working as a librarian, and I changed in, so I'm just trying to get the get the thumbnail right so I can see me, so I know that whether I'm talking to the screen. There it is. I'm going to pin my video. That's right. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to retrain as a nutritionist, and my interest from the start was in plant-based nutrition. And so I did the eCornell course in plant-based nutrition. I also studied the course by Dr. John McDougall, and after that I decided to go back to university and do a graduate course in human nutrition, which wasn't focused on plant-based, but it gave me a really good grounding in nutrition. So together with Dr. Malcolm, who many of you met last week, we started building our website back in, I think, beginning of 2013. And because I'm a librarian, my focus with the website was to make it a resource with links to all the best resources, as well as content that Malcolm was writing about plant-based diets and their impact on things like heart disease and diabetes and so on. So we've been building that very steadily over the past 6 or 7 years. Yes, Denise mentioned that I also am very involved in building community in Australia. There was a colleague of mine we hadn't actually met face to face when we discussed, first of all, starting a group. This was, again, going back about 7 years ago. And the group was called Whole Food Plant-Based Aussies. And we were so excited after the first 24 hours, we had 30 people in it. Now there's nearly 16,000 members in this group. So it's a group of Australians interested in whole food plant-based, but we're spread right around Australia. So we're also involved in setting up a local, what's called a pod, a community of people in my city, Melbourne, and I liaise with other pod leaders right around Australia. So we stay quite connected in many, many different ways. Because I think it's really important when people start eating this way, they often don't even have the support from within their own family. And so it's really important to have other people to connect with and share ideas and get new ideas about how to eat. So that's a bit about me. And some of these photos are, I've had the absolute privilege of traveling to the United States every year to an international plant-based nutrition conference. And so I've met people like T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Mike Clapper, and Dr. John McDougall. As you can see, if any of you have looked at any of their materials, you'll recognise some of them. So I'm very, very fortunate. So now launching into my presentation, just to begin, I know Denise has been giving you a lot of information about plant-based diets, but I just like to sort of start in a place as a nutritionist where there's a lot of confusion out there. I'm not quite sure how confusing it is in China, but in Australia it certainly is very confusing, because there's so many people saying that, first it was the paleo diet and then the low carb diet, and high fat and high and even the carnivore diet has been popular lately, high meat diet. And certainly a lot of people have been thinking they need to be gluten-free. And of course, more recently, there is more interest in plant-based diets or vegan diets. And what I like to do is focus on the dietary patterns that have solid evidence for health and longevity. So forget all the confusion. And this is, when I study nutrition, this is really clear. A diet that's high in whole grains, legumes, vegetables and fruit, mostly unprocessed foods that are high in fibre, are the healthiest foods. There's no doubt about that in however you look at it. And so the real key, though, with the plant foods is to make it very few processed foods, and certainly to stay away from as many animal foods as much as you can. So eating more of the foods in that picture, it's not controversial. And certainly the Australian dietary guidelines support that, and I'm sure the eating pyramid in China would also support that, or whatever your guidelines are called. I'm going to make sure, can I see the chat? If anyone at any point, I'm just not sure I can see the chat at the same time as doing my thing, but if anyone has a question that if there's something that I say you're not sure about, please do stop me and maybe type something in the chat box, or to unmute yourself. Okay, so what I'm not sure about is whether, when I have the little chat box open, is it hiding anything on my screen? So I'm talking about calorie density, or I could be calling it energy density. In Australia, we actually talk about kilojoules rather than calories, but a lot of us, particularly older people like myself, we still tend to think in calories, which is why I've called the talk calorie density. But the proper term is energy density. And it's the key to weight management. And it's also the key to thriving if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, whether you want to lose weight, maintain your weight, or to put on weight. I mean, some people actually do want to put on weight. It helps people choose the foods to give you enough energy to get through the day. When eating whole plant foods, the challenge is to eat enough calories for your energy needs. And we'll come back to that point later on when I run you through all the principles of calorie density. But I first want to, and so I don't, because I don't sort of know you as a group, I'm not sure whether for some of you your focus is on weight loss or what it is, but I just want to talk a little bit about obesity because I know even in China, that chronic disease is on the increase and obesity is on the increase, as it certainly is in Australia. And people often like to talk about, about the problem, why is obesity increasing? They say, oh, it's because we're too sedentary. Now, you may not know that word, but that we don't do enough exercise, that we sit at a desk all day. And yes, exercise is really important, but if you're eating a diet of too many calories, then you can't outrun a rich diet. So I'm just seeing a couple of questions about honey. I'll come back to, if you can remind me towards the end of my talk, I'll talk about honey. And Kuldeep has asked, do we have any scientific evidence on all the other diets? As I say, what I like to focus on what the evidence is for the foods that are healthy, which are the whole grains, legumes, vegetables and fruits. I think that's a better way to look at it rather than talk about, is there evidence for a paleo diet? There's actually evidence that a paleo diet is not healthy at all, but I don't go into that in my talk tonight. Anyway, I'll go on. So in terms of, and one of the big messages that people are given if they're trying to lose weight is that you've just got to eat smaller portions and you need to exercise willpower, stop eating so much. Others say it's because and this is a big story that's told in the USA and in Australia, so I don't know if this is in China, but some of the people advocating a paleo or a low carb diet say, oh, it's because we were told to eat low fat. We went and ate low fat, and then everyone got fatter. So it's not the meat, it's not the fat, it's the carbs, and particularly sugar. So I like to explore, is sugar really the problem? You can actually go and get data from the Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO, on any country in the world. And I've looked up for China sugar consumption since 1980. Now you can see it's up a little bit, it's up and down, and there's a little bit of a trend on the upwards. This data is showing per person in China per year how much sugar, between about 5.5 kilos back in 1980 to probably about 7.5 kilos. So there's an increase, but that cannot explain why people are putting on weight. So let's just look at a few other figures. I've actually got looking at grains, because people that advocate a low carb diet will often say that grains are not healthy and we eat too many of them. Now, I will agree that eating refined grains that are highly processed are not healthy, but whole grains are. Anyway, in China, since 1980, you're actually eating less grains, which includes rice. You're eating less rice. So in the years in which diabetes has increased in China, you're eating less rice. Cheese. Now, to put this into perspective, I know in China, cheese is not a popular, is not a very common food. It's an increase, but you've got to look at where you started from. Per person per year, you eat less than 1/10 of a kilo. So the rise isn't that important, but I've just kept it in there because when I give these slides in Australia, you have a look at Australian cheese consumption compared with China, where you had 1/10 of a kilogram per year. In Australia in 1970, we ate, I think, about 3 or 4 kilos, and now we eat more than 10 kilos a year. So Australians eat a lot of cheese. Let's just go back to looking at the data in China. I'll just quickly whip through some of these. What has increased? And so this is a very big increase. If you look in terms of kilograms per person per year, fish and seafood is now up, getting near to 40 kilograms per year when it was much closer to zero 30 or 40 years ago. Meat, so meat consumption has gone up, skyrocketed up. It's probably now sitting at about 60 kilograms per person per year when it was down probably below about 20. What else is there? Egg consumption. So per person per year, egg consumption has skyrocketed up to getting close to 20 kilograms of eggs per person per year. Milk consumption as well has increased. It was a very slow increase, but then rapidly went up around about from 2003-4 onwards. Now, this is the biggie, and I'm going to come back to talking about oils. I'm sure Denise has told you a little bit about oil. In China, the consumption of vegetable oils has also gone up. Now, I've got a figure. This data, unfortunately, stops in 2012. The FAO have been doing something different in the past few years, and I can't get the equivalent data onto a graph to show you what it's doing up until 2017. But we can only guess, as we can in Australia, that oil consumption has continued to go up, but we don't know what that is. But on this slide, I've translated how much oil that is per person per day increase between 1980 and 2013. Just on oil alone, every person in China is having 179 calories per person per day. You have an extra 179 calories in your day every day of your life, every day of the year. That alone will put on weight. And we're seeing this in Australia. I think Australians are having about 300 calories per day more than they did 40 years ago. And if there was one food that you wanted to point the finger at causing obesity, I would put it at oil, because oil is very calorie dense. Let me come back to that. Okay, so I'm just going to pop back and have a little look at if there's any questions. So Mahalia is saying she's been vegan 2 years, hasn't seen any change in weight. She's hasn't gained but haven't lost. Watched a talk on calorie density. I think I see the missing link. Okay, so you've seen presumably Jeff Novick's talk on calorie density. And I meant to say at the start, I mean, I stand on the shoulders of others who are giants in this field, and one of them is Jeff Novick, and also Doug Lyle and Alan Goldhammer. They all are very knowledgeable about this topic. Cool Deep's wondering if there's one diet fits all. I think you've just got to look through all the material over the time that you're with Denise to get an idea about that, because we come back to the foods, whole grains, legumes, vegetables and fruit are healthy, and the science is clear on that. Okay, so talking about sort of getting around to introducing calorie density to you, the law of satiety. When an animal is in the natural environment, they maintain weight within a narrow range even when their food is plentiful. Now, I know that you're not in Australia, but you've probably all seen pictures of kangaroos. And yes, when we go into country, into the countryside in Australia, we do see kangaroos in the field, jumping about on the lush grass. However, when the grass is really plentiful, which is their food, they never put on weight. So you don't see, I mean, I've just stretched that image. You do never ever see fat kangaroos in a paddock or in a field. And so when animals in the natural environment are exposed to their natural food, they maintain their weight. The only animals or species that put on weight are humans and the pets that they keep. They're the only ones that are that become overweight, as well as there's a few species that live in the extremes, like in the Arctic, that are designed to store some fat for when they can't get any food over the winter time. But apart from that, all other animals, when the fig tree is in, rich with figs, the parrots sitting in the tree, or whatever birds that you have in China, making absolutely gorging themselves on figs, they don't ever get fat. They don't fall out of the tree because they're overweight. So the problem is that we're attracted to calorie-rich food, and if they're around, if we can get our hands on them and eat them, we will. And it's a survival mechanism. We do this because throughout our human history, the problem was getting enough food. The problem was because, going back thousands of years, there wasn't enough, or there could have been in certain regions long periods of famine. So the problem in the past was getting enough to eat. And now that we're in an environment where food is plentiful, our problem is that we're eating too much, but we're eating too much of foods that are too rich. Yeah, and just question from Cool Deep about BMI. What extent do you think BMI is applicable to all races? Look, it's a very crude measure. It's not a perfect measure, but it's, to some extent, I think in different populations in the world might actually be suffering chronic disease at a lower BMI. So in that sense, it's probably not, it's not, if someone has a BMI of 25 from, say, Australia, might actually be healthier than someone with a BMI of just a few, like 23 that is from China. That's possible. I don't know the details of that though. Okay, so I'm not sure if Denise has introduced you to The Pleasure Trap. So the authors of The Pleasure Trap, psychologist Doug Lisle and Alan Goldhammer. It's an excellent book to read, and it explains our attraction to calorie-dense foods. It explains why we're driven to eat the wrong kind of food, remembering that we're designed to seek the richest food in our environment because that's a survival mechanism. Because going back thousands of years, the richest food in our environment might have been that bit of an animal that you could trap or catch. The calorie density of that animal is still way lower than eating even bread or oils. And so we're designed to seek those foods because they give us the greatest pleasure for the least amount of effort. And that's who we are. That's our survival mechanism. It's not that there's anything wrong with you if you've got rich food in your pantry and in your fridge. You're designed to be drawn to it. And the problem with modern food is that it's too concentrated, and the food industry knows how to make food addictive so that you can't put down that chip or that cracker or whatever it is. And they do that by removing the fibre, removing the water, adding salt, sugar and fat, often in a combination of all three, adding salt, sugar and fat. Whether it's sweet or whether it's a savoury food just depends on how they've tweaked the ratio of the salt and the sugar. So they do that to make it hyper palatable, hyper concentrated, so you can't put it down. So this thing about people who are overweight or obese are told that you eat too much. It's not that you're eating too much. What you need to do is eat more foods that are high in fibre. In Australia, we certainly have a very low average fibre intake per day. And people should be eating more than twice that amount. I'm not sure what the figures are in China. in terms of the intake. Okay, Denise, you're mentioning that students should have watched is that the Jeff Novick YouTube? There's a couple of different versions. Doug Lyle also talks about calorie density, as does Dr. Anthony Lim. He does a really good job of it too. So this message, if someone is overweight or obese, that, you know, just eat food in moderation. Everything's okay. You know, just eat smaller portions. And yet my message is no, eat larger portions of whole natural foods. You know, stay away from foods that look like the ones in this picture, of these little morsels on a plate of really, really rich, sweet food. And the problem with moderation is that it keeps you trapped. If you are trying to eat a whole food plant-based diet, and, you know, a diet based on, you know, rice and beans and vegetables and fruit, and you allow yourself, you think, oh well, I've been good this week, I deserve to have that little bit of rich chocolate or a packet of chips or Pringles or whatever it is, whatever they're called in China, some little you know, very rich salty fatty food. If you allow yourself to have that every so often in moderation, it keeps you wanting that food. It keeps you maintaining the taste for it, so that you're always wanting it, you're always missing it. When you don't have it, you think you're feeling deprived. So practicing moderation is going against your you know, your natural physiology. Your natural physiology is you know, eat as much as you can when you can get your hands on it, because the food supply in, you know, ancient times was not very rich. And the thing about with moderation, some people can do it. You know, you might know someone, or maybe you're that person that could have the chocolate bar in your kitchen on the bench and just eat one little square per day. But most people can't do that. You know, if there's something like a block of chocolate in their kitchen, when they start eating it, they can't stop, and that's quite normal. And yeah, so I'm just, is there some food like that in nature? Well, I'm going to start to talk about particular foods and their calorie density. And the thing is, yes, there are some very calorie-rich foods in nature, such as nuts, but they would only be in season at certain times of the year, and they were in hard shells, which made them hard to eat quickly. So although there have been those foods in certain parts, not right throughout the world, you know, they're not in the supplies that you know, you can go to the supermarket now and buy, you know, a huge pack of cashews or almonds, and you can just sit there and eat them. You couldn't have done that going back thousands of years ago. Okay, so the thing about the pleasure trap is that what we're wanting you to do, what Denise is wanting you to do, is to stop eating foods that are so rich and eat foods that are whole natural foods, such as the grains and the legumes and the fruit and veg. But when you first do that, you might have a sense that it doesn't taste so nice. You're thinking, oh, you know, I really miss that, you know, salty, oily, sugary food. And to know that eventually, if you look at this is from the book, The Pleasure Trap, look at this graph. And when you're eating whole natural foods, food just tastes normal to you. But you start eating very rich, you know, Doug Lyle's called it junk foods. You start eating very rich foods, and you're in a sense of enhanced pleasure. And you think, oh, this is just delicious. This is wonderful. But over time, those delicious foods become your normal. And so you're no longer in an enhanced pleasure, although, you know, you're always seeking out something richer that might make you feel better. And when you first go back to whole natural foods, you'll have a sense of deprivation, and you'll think, this food tastes bland. I mean, and you might be having this experience at the moment in trying to eat differently, and just to know that eventually these foods will taste quite normal to you. You mightn't have that same sense of thinking, oh, this is just delicious, as something that's really rich. But it can take a while. It can take a few weeks at least, and often a few months to retrain your taste buds so that you're no longer, wanting and craving foods that are really rich. Oops, I'm just trying to minimize the chat box. So if there are foods that you are really addicted to, that you think are absolutely delicious, and whether that's chocolate or chips or something like that, how do you break free? And the only answer is that you've just got to stop. This little cartoon's talking about cheese, because I know in Australia, if you ask everyone who's gone whole food plant-based what was the hardest thing to give up, they nearly always say cheese. And how do you do it? You just got to stop. The only way. So talking a little bit about satiety. Satiety is about feeling full. So I've eaten a big meal tonight. It's what's the time in Australia? It's just on 9 o'clock in Australia. So I ate my dinner just an hour or so ago, and I ate a very big meal, and so my stomach's still really full. So I have a feeling of satiety. I'm not hungry, and even though an hour or two after dinner, I'm still not hungry. The thing to know about satiety, though, is that foods of equal calories don't represent equal satiety. Calorie density is the key in here, and the volume and the weight of the food is important. So I had a meal that was quite low in calorie density, so I could eat a large volume, and I've reached satiety. I could have eaten the same meal of same number of calories that were more calorie dense, and that would not necessarily give me a sense of satiety, and I might still have room in my stomach to eat a bit more. So the foods that increase satiety are those that are unrefined, unprocessed, whole plant foods. And so these are foods that are low in calorie density, high in fiber, high in water, and high in nutrients. So not just things like your iron and calcium and all of those things. So that they all contribute to satiety. So in all of this, we do want you to avoid refined and processed carbohydrates, particularly ones that are like baked. Like if you've refined a flour to be like white flour, that high in calorie density, has little or no fiber, very low in nutrients. And particularly when it's baked, if you've made a cake from a refined flour, it's low in water, and so you can get a lot of calories in and not necessarily achieve satiety. I'll just move on. So I don't know if you've seen this stomach, whether Denise might have shown you this series of stomachs. This is from Forks Over Knives, and so here you can see the average person eats. I know it varies depending on, male, female, but let's just say on average we eat a meal of around 500 calories. So this is showing you what 500 calories looks like in your stomach. If you have 500 calories of oil, it's hardly anything in your stomach at all. You have 500 calories of cheese, there's a little bit more, but there's still a lot of room in your stomach to fit more food in. You have 500 calories of meat, not quite half full. But as you go up the scale, you'll see 500 calories of potatoes, rice and beans just about fills your stomach, only a little bit of room left to add some veggies in there. If you ate 500 calories of fruit and veggies alone, it's actually hard to even get 500 calories into a stomach. You have to eat such a large volume of fruits and veggies to get anywhere near that. The thing is that people usually eat the same volume of food regardless of how many calories are on the plate. So if you're accustomed to eating something that has some meat, has some cheese, has some oil in it, and you take those off your plate and you put a serve of, rice and lentils and say some steamed greens. If you eat the same volume as you did last week, if you were eating that meat, you'll probably find you've got you have not got enough calories on your plate. So the more concentrated the food is, the easier it is to eat too many. If you look at that meat, cheese and oil, you could eat 500 calories of meat and 500 calories of cheese and oil in the one meal and have a meal of 1500 calories. So that's how calorie density, why it's important, because it's so easy to overeat calories when you're eating foods that are that are high in calorie density. I'm just checking the chat box again. Okay, in a video from the course, the presenter said if we eat up to 80% of food, it helps in longevity. Look, where that's come from is the author of a book called The Blue Zones looked at the longest lived populations around the world, and one of them is Okinawa in Japan, and they have there is this story that they would only eat to 80% full, so they wouldn't eat until they were totally full. However, the thing that makes that a little strange is that if I only ate till I was 80% full with the kind of foods that I currently eat, I wouldn't get enough calories and I would lose weight, and I can't afford to lose any more weight. So as I say, I think what that's really talking about is when people are having foods that are a little richer, yeah, you need to not fill that stomach. If you think about having meat and cheese and other processed foods, which you know, bread is still quite calorie dense, then that would be a reason to only eat up to 80% full. But if you're eating potatoes, rice, beans, fruits and veg, you pretty much need to feed your stomach just about every meal just to get enough. Okay, so now coming back to the actual topic of calorie density and explaining it in a bit more detail. So if you've seen Jeff Novick or Doug Lyle talk about this, they talk about calories per pound. Well, we don't talk about pounds in Australia, we talk in terms of grams or kilograms. And so Malcolm and I have developed a chart which uses calories per 100 grams. So I'm going to start talking about foods in that sort of quantity of weight. Calorie density or energy density is a constant value for any given food, regardless of the portion size. So you can look up the calorie density of any food stuff. I know certainly in Australia we've got a nutrition database where we can, you know, how many calories in 100 grams of broccoli, how many calories in 100 grams of any food. And it's a constant that's regardless of the portion size. So these two plates show you, one plate has more carrots on it than the other, but the portions, so the portion size of one is twice the other. So there's more calories on the plate where there's more carrots, but the calorie density or energy density is a constant, and that is at 41 calories per 100 grams. So this is our chart, and so remembering that we've just seen the carrots are around 40, if you look to the left of the chart where we've got vegetables, this is 25 calories per 100 grams. That's an average, so some, you know, carrots are a bit higher than that. Things like zucchini and cucumber are much lower than that, much lower than 25. So 25 is about an average, 25 calories per 100 grams of food. Coming up the chart a little bit is fruits sitting at an average of around 60. Again, bananas are more calorie dense, so they're higher. Things like strawberries that have a lot of water in them are lower than 60, but they average out at 60. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, slightly more calorie dense than white potatoes, but they average at around 70. Legumes, again, some a little more calorie dense. Your lentils would be lower because they absorb so much water in the cooking. Chickpeas and edamame beans, you know, tofu are a little higher, but the average is around 100. So rice and pasta, now in this case, whether it's white rice or brown rice, the calorie density is around the same, although the white rice would have only less than half the amount of nutrition in it. So rice and pasta are around 125. So you notice I've got all those in green. And then we move up the chart to meat and avocado have a calorie density of around 200. So I'll just pause there and you think about what that means when you go from the legumes at 100 calories per 100 grams to meat at 200, if you have a plate of food and you have a piece of meat that's, let's say it's just 100 grams of meat, and I mean people eat a lot more than that in one serve, but 100 grams of meat, the size of it on the plate, if you're swapping that for legumes, you've got to eat twice the volume. And that's how it contributes to satiety, because you've got to eat twice as much and it fills you up more. So that's that difference. So we move up the chart and you'll see breads, and bread is different to rice and pasta because the rice and pasta still has the water weight in the grain, you know, whatever it's made of, whether it's a wheat pasta or some other sort. Whereas bread and other baked foods, whether it's oatmeal cookies, they have a higher calorie density because they don't have much water weight in them. So then we go up the chart, and this is where you'll see nuts and seeds. So that question from Kuldeep about, you know, in nature, yes, there are some foods that we can find that naturally growing, haven't been processed, that are very high in calorie density, and that's your nuts and seeds. And so it doesn't take much. A little handful of nuts can actually contribute a lot of calories to your plate, into you. And then right at the top of the chart is oils. And I know you might think, well, I don't normally have 100 grams of oils. What does it matter? Well, even if you only have, you know, 20 grams of oil, that's a lot of calories for a very small volume of food. Okay, what's the question here? Is there differentiations between brown rice and white rice as far as calorie density? No, not much different. Only really, you know, different varieties of both brown and white rice. They might have slightly different calorie density, but not by much. But the big difference when you go from brown to white is that the white rice has lost more than half its nutrients in the processing. So things like if you're worried about getting enough iron and zinc and fibre, then the brown rice gives you, you know, much more. So that's the reason why we always like people to, where you can get it. I know if you're eating out, it might be very hard to get brown rice, but when you're at home, you know, make it brown rice. You know, if you find it a little hard to eat brown rice, if you find it too chewy, you know, choose a variety, you know, a basmati or a jasmine brown rice that's a little softer, and maybe cook it a bit longer. Yeah, and so definitely, because satiety also comes not just from the calories, but from the nutrients. So the reason you would achieve greater satiety eating brown rice is that your body can detect that it's had those extra nutrients that are not in the white rice. Okay, so just to show you a few slides, now I'm thinking at my clock of I'm talking too slowly. I'm saying too much per slide. Okay, I've got a few slides to get through. The calorie, what does 100 grams look like? So if you remember that chart, and I said veggies were around 25 per 100 grams. Well, this is a small plate of broccoli. So that's sitting on the scales. That shows you there's 30 calories on that plate. So all of that broccoli is only 30 calories. And remember I said that most people eat a meal of around 500. You'd have to eat a lot of broccoli if that was going to be your only food that you would eat. Strawberries, 26 calories per 100 grams. So you could binge on a whole punnet of strawberries and you haven't eaten that many calories. Medjool dates, or is that the next one? Yes, is one thing that is a whole food, but it's a little more calorie dense than other fruits. It is more like a dried fruit, even though that is how they grow. They grow on a tree like that. They're not actually dried, but they share a lot more in common with dried fruit, which are higher in calorie density. So just a little caution. Although dates, it's very popular for people to use dates as a sweetener when cooking whole food plant-based meals, particularly making desserts. Just be careful because one of those dates could be around 50 calories. So it's easy to eat too many. Okay. where's my cursor gone? Sorry, don't know why there it is. This is showing you, so I'm no longer looking at a plate of 100 grams. In the US, you'll hear them talk about an ounce, eating an ounce of nuts. And people often say, yeah, you can eat up to an ounce of nuts a day, and that's pretty healthy. That's fine. Except in certain, people with chronic disease maybe might want to not quite go that, eat that much. Or if you find that it's way too easy to eat that whole plate, which is about 190 calories, and then eat the whole plate again, then maybe nuts should be something that you keep away from. So it doesn't, because nuts are so calorie dense, it doesn't take much to give you a lot of calories. So that plate combined of 2 walnuts and some almonds and cashews and 1 Brazil nut comes to 190 calories. So here I'm just going to compare a few foods where in each food they're the same number of calories. So that little chocolate block of 5 squares is a total of 117 calories. So I've calculated that based on its calorie density, and then I've weighed it. So that's how I've arrived at that. So the calorie density of chocolate is 535 calories per 100 grams. And you compare that to the calorie density of an apple. So that apple is 117 calories as well. The difference is, if you ate an apple, you probably don't feel like picking up another apple straight afterwards and eating it. But if you were eating that chocolate, could you eat the same again, or even 3 times that amount of chocolate? So the real thing with calorie density is that the more calorie dense it is, the easier it is to overeat. Okay. So this is comparing nuts with potatoes. So people often think, oh, potatoes are fattening. Oh, I'm not eating potatoes because they make me fat. Well, the calorie density of a boiled or even a baked potato is still so low compared to the calorie density of nuts. So we're comparing 93 calories per 100 grams in those potatoes versus 580 calories per 100 grams in the nuts. So you can see when I calculate each plate has 200 calories on it, very hard to, I could probably, if I was hungry, I could eat those 4 potatoes, but I would have a nice full tummy and I've only eaten 200 calories. I could also easily eat that plate of cashews and I could keep going. And so you can see it's much easier to overeat the food that's more calorie dense. This is showing you the difference between dried fruit and the whole fruit. So dried fruits such as sultanas, they're more calorie dense because they've lost their water weight versus the grapes as grown. So it's much easier to overeat dried fruit as well. Now, dried fruit is healthy. Like, they still contain most of the nutrients of the original fruit. So we're not saying to stay away from them, but just be cautious if you're trying to lose weight. These plates show you the same number of calories in each of those different foods. So there's 160 calories of cooked brown rice, 160 calories in that 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and there's 160 calories in that nice, it's a good quality whole grain bread, whole wheat flour. And it just shows you with the oil and the rice, you could tip the oil over the rice and you'd hardly notice it, but you would have just doubled the calories on the plate. And bread. So I'm now just coming back to lots of questions coming up. Okay, if we make almond milk out of almonds, the thing about almond milk or any of the nut milks is that there are so few nuts per litre of milk. So there's not many almonds in a litre of almond milk. So calorie density includes the water weight. So there's a lot of water in the almond milk. And so it's not as calorie dense. But if you compare that to, say, peanut butter or peanut paste, or just eating straight nuts, they're much more calorie dense. So I'm just, the question Corndeep has asked about how do you compare peanuts versus other nuts? They're all very similar in their calorie density. So then the question comes down to whether you Are there certain types of nuts healthier than others that might be lower in saturated fat or higher in omega-3? So you make those decisions, but I'm not going to be covering that here tonight. This picture shows you the price of adding just a little bit of fat to that potato. So I'd mentioned before that people often blame potatoes for making them fat. The potato that has no margarine in it is about 86 calories. I've weighed that potato, and I've got a potato of the same weight where I've added, I think, just a little knob of margarine, and it not quite doubles the amount of calories in there. So it's what you add to your foods like potatoes and rice and beans that can make the difference. It can double or triple the calories. I've also got the figures here for potatoes, if they're just steamed or baked, are quite low in calorie density, about 82 calories per 100 grams. But you put potatoes into oil, like fried chips, and you've tripled. You look at that, 100 grams of fries is over 300 calories. So it's the oil that makes the difference. This is showing you adding, one slice of bread at 161 calories, so reasonably calorie dense compared with the rice and lentils and things. But you add a serve of peanut butter to that bread, and you've added, more than 100 more calories to it. So it's what you add to the bread that can make it even more calorie dense. If someone's trying to lose weight and they're still eating bread, we do actually recommend maybe backing off on bread if you're trying to lose weight. But if you're still eating bread, maybe add hummus to it rather than a nut butter like peanuts butter. This is showing a plate of food. This is one of my dinners that I photographed a few years ago. And so I didn't actually weigh out anything on the night that I ate this, but I'm just making a guess about what's on this plate. So we just imagine that kale and the broccoli and the zucchini, that there's about 100 grams of each. There's probably not quite, but let's imagine that there is that much. And based on their calorie density, we can see how many calories would be on this side of the plate. I've got some cooked rice. Let's say there's 100 grams of rice hiding under there. It's probably a bit more than that, but let's say it's just 100. And so at its calorie density, 120. And over on this side, we've got some mashed potatoes, some baked pumpkin. So imagine that there's 100 grams of each of those based on their calorie density, which is still quite low. And then we've got a lentil dish. Now, there are some veggies in there, but let's just imagine that that's just a straight, lentil dal or something. And that's also low in calorie density. So if I add up all of these, even if I imagine that there's, 100 grams of each of these foods, I get a meal that only has 388 calories. Now, if I admit there's probably more rice on this plate, so even if I double the rice, it only brings it up to 508 calories, and that's a huge plate of food. And that I eat that. That's a typical meal for me. Compare if you've been eating fish or meat, the average slice of salmon is cut to be around 200 grams. And the calorie density of the salmon at 200 calories per 100 grams means that one piece of meat or fish is about 400 calories. So if you just imagine you're looking at that big plate of plant-based food, and that's only around 400 calories. At most, it might be up near 500. Just one piece of fish can be that many calories. So that's one reason why when you switch to whole food plant-based, you do have to learn to eat much bigger portions of food. And so just coming back as a reminder for this. There's just a few more things I want to cover before I go. I was going to sort of try and go to questions about now, but there's probably a little bit too much detail. I'm going to skip over this one. If you've got a favourite recipe that you're familiar with cooking and you're wondering how you can lower the calorie density in the food, what I do is look at any recipe and think, well, which are the most calorie dense, calorie rich items in this list? The standout is the hot olive oil. That's a lot of olive oil to add to a recipe. There's sweet potato, there's chickpeas, and there's almonds. So I calculated this recipe and then worked out per serve how many calories, if I cooked this exactly as given and served it by, put it into 4 serves, each serve would be 639 calories. If I took the oil out, which is the most calorie rich food, that comes down to 433 calories. The next most calorie dense food are the almonds. If I took them out of the recipe, I haven't lost a lot of volume, but I've lost a lot of calories. And you can see the calculation, if you cook that or prepare that meal, that salad, without the almonds and without the oil, per serve, it's only 228 calories. What that means is you could eat 2 serves and you'd have a huge volume of food that would help you reach satiety, and you haven't overeaten in terms of calories. Always, if you're buying, processed foods, have a look at the calorie density on the label. So this is a food that's sold and very popular in Australia. They're chips, salt and vinegar chips. And the problem here, I've been talking calories, and our label here gives you kilojoules. Sometimes we're given both. You've often got to do a bit of a conversion. There's just roughly over 4 kilojoules per calorie. So we divide that figure by 4.2 and we get 481 calories per 100 grams. So if you think of where that sits on the chart, that's very calorie dense and very easy to overeat. And of course it has salt and a lot of fat. So my tips for those wanting to lose weight is to eat more whole plant foods that are unrefined and unprocessed, and avoid processed foods, which include oils, and even to avoid, baked cookies and those sorts of things, and particularly if they're based on refined flours. And to avoid the very high calorie density foods, especially the olive oil. So just a special mention for oil, that tablespoon of olive oil has the same number of calories as that can of Coke. 160 calories in the Coke can and 160 calories in that tablespoon of olive oil. If we never needed oil to begin with, wonder why oil was ever even invented. That's a good question. Why was it even invented? So as I say, I'm sure Denise has gone through talking about oils with you. What I like to point out on this slide, I've been talking about, well, a tablespoon is 160 calories, and someone says to me, but I don't use much oil. Okay, so do you have a meal where there might be a teaspoon here and a teaspoon there, and a couple of times a day you have a few teaspoons? Just think, every teaspoon of oil, whether it's olive oil, coconut oil, whatever oil it is, every teaspoon is 40 calories. That's twice the number of calories as the teaspoon of sugar. And each of those foods, sugar or oil, have almost no nutrients worth anything, any value, no iron and calcium and zinc, etc. So almost no nutrients. And they're also a very poor source of omega-3 fats, and they're the one group of fats that people are usually most concerned about making sure they get some in their day. And so on. So we've got a page on our website, I'm sure Denise has probably linked to it at some point, about why we recommend no oil. I won't go on about that anymore. Other strategies for weight loss, we do recommend that you don't drink your calories. If you're a fan of smoothies, they have their place in terms of, it's a great way of getting some, maybe if it's a green smoothie, getting some extra greens into you. But just know that blending food is not helpful for weight loss. They're good for weight gain. So if you're underweight, or you've got, an athlete in your family and they're not getting enough calories, yeah, maybe add in a smoothie every day. And they're a good way of getting some extra nutrients into you. But generally, we say we don't drink your calories, you chew your food. However, the research does show that soups are good for weight loss, so they don't fall in quite the same category as smoothies because it takes you longer to eat the soup because it's hot. Other strategies, if you're trying to lose weight, we say lower the calorie density of your meals by adding, excuse me, I have some water, adding even more vegetables into your food, you know, those that are very low in calorie density. But we say don't go too far. You can't live on salad and fruit alone. You just can't get enough calories in the day. You still got to eat starches. You still need some rice or pasta or potatoes, you know, and some, you know, lentils or beans. You still need to be eating those, but you could just, if you're struggling to lose weight, maybe just eat a greater volume of those sort of green, you know, particularly the green veggies and green and yellow veggies. People often ask me about meal timing. You know, is it good to fast every day or every other day, or should I eat between this time and that time? My big message is with eating whole food plant-based is that you're better just to have a regular meal eating pattern. You know, and if there's one meal to skip, it should be supper. You know, rather than skipping breakfast, get breakfast into you because that's when you need the energy, which is why we eat food, for energy, and skip that supper. So I'm not a big fan of fasting. You know, there are some, you know, has its place, and particularly water fasting for you know, the therapy of reversing disease can be really valuable, but it's recommended if you're going to do a water only fast that it be supervised by you know, a medical doctor. If we're intermittent fasting by skipping dinner, the question is, would we be getting enough nutrients for our energy needs? Well, it depends on what you're eating throughout the day. And this is where it's a balance between people who are focused on wanting to lose weight. If you have, you know, quite a few kilos or pounds to lose, you can be thinking, oh, it's good to only eat 2 meals, isn't it? But the thing is that that can leave you very vulnerable to snacking at a time when you're, you know, you just you're tired and it's late, and you know, if there can become a time of night where people can just think, I want the richest food in my house, and they remember that there's an ice cream in the freezer or there's those cookies in the pantry, and so it can leave you very vulnerable if you haven't eaten enough calories by a long shot. Like if you're trying to lose weight, you do need to undereat a little, but you don't want to be undereating so much every day because then you won't get enough nutrients. You know, and you won't have enough energy. You'll be, and this is a danger when someone switches to whole food plant-based, and they might try it for a few weeks and then say, oh, I'm so tired, you know, this doesn't work for me, I must need meat, or I must need, you know, something else that's really rich. And the thing is, you're probably just under eating by too much. And you know, although I'm talking about weight loss, really the point of eating whole food plant-based is for health, and weight loss is a nice side effect for those that are wanting to lose weight. So yeah, I'm just not a big fan of forcing the fasting. If it suits you to only have a couple of main meals a day, it's better to make sure that you finish eating at an early enough time that you've got plenty of hours before bedtime. Good for, you know, let your food digest before you go to bed. So that's the meal to skip. Don't eat too late. But you know, whether that you eat 3 meals a day, that's up to you. Okay. A couple more slides before I finish. If you're tempted by rich food, what do you do? I know when I used to work in a library, every day it seemed that it was someone's birthday and someone brought a cake in, and there'd be this rich little thing that they'd be cutting up and saying, oh, would you like a piece? And you think, oh, but I brought my banana in for morning tea. And if I eat that little cake, I then won't want my banana. So my strategy was, when I was first transitioning to whole food plant-based, is to make sure I ate that low calorie density food first. So if you've, you know, if you're in the workplace and you've got some fruit, eat that, and then think about whether you know, if someone's insisting on saying, oh, just have a tiny taste, and you won't be so tempted to eat a huge piece. So that's my way of just eat something else first that's low in calorie density as a way of trying to ward off eating something very rich. So just final thing on weight loss before I flip it around talking about, for not everyone wants to lose weight, is that if you're trying to lose weight, generally just eating rice and beans and potatoes and fruit and veg and some nuts and seeds, most people will lose weight. If you've got a lot of weight to lose, just eating this way and not fussing too much, you know, just you'll usually lose weight. But you might get to a stage where weight loss is stalled, and if so, that's when we recommend you really cut back and, you know, maybe don't have at all, you know, nuts and seeds, avocados. Be very sparing with your use of plant milks. I know that there was the question about the calorie density of plant milks. It's quite low, but it's liquid and it adds calories. So if you're having, you know, breakfast cereal and you're pouring 2 cups of milk over it, there's calories in that milk. You know, better to maybe have more water. Certainly if you like oatmeal, as I do, better to cook it up in water and maybe just use milk as a flavouring. So the other thing to be sparing is just for, you know, extra weight loss is any flour products. So anything, you know, even if it's whole grain flour, baked into bread, baked into cookies, maybe stay away from those because they are more calorie dense. They're healthy if they're based on whole grains, but they're calorie dense. Stay away from sugar syrups, even if it's based on a whole food like date paste. Stay away from them. Maple syrup. Be careful with salt. We do say if you do want to add salt, don't cook with it. Just add a little bit at the table. But remember that salt increases appetite. So the danger in using salt is that you might overeat. So these foods listed above are all fine on a regular whole food plant-based eating pattern, but if you're trying to lose weight, maybe stay well away from them for at least for a little while. Okay, so this is our little traffic light system that we've developed. So that just gives you an idea of the foods that are in the green light category. We say, you know, unlimited. It's hard to overeat when you eat those foods. So whole grains in their intact form, so brown rice, your oats, millet, your legumes, your starchy vegetables, your non-starchy vegetables, green leafy vegetables, fruit, mushrooms. Mushrooms aren't actually a vegetable, that's why they're listed separately, not part of the vegetable family. And herbs and spices, they're very healthy. So green light means go for it. Yellow light means caution. So if you're trying to lose weight, it's those yellow light foods that you stay away from or really minimize. If you're trying to gain weight or you're worried about losing too much weight, you'll eat a little bit more out of the yellow light category. And the red light are the things to stay away from altogether, but you'll notice I've given special dispensation to white rice. It is a refined grain, but it's okay occasionally when brown rice is not available, but it's not as healthy as eating the brown rice. Okay, and so the flip side of this is if you don't want to lose weight, what do? Have a look at that energy density chart or calorie density chart and shift the average calorie density higher. So maybe don't eat quite as big a volume of those very low calorie density vegetables. I know I love eating cucumber, and every evening I cut up cucumber and I offer it to Malcolm, and it might be that he doesn't like it, I don't know, but he always says, oh no, it'll fill me up and give me almost no calories. There's so few calories in cucumber, and he wants, because he's very athletic, so he wants to make sure with every meal he eats enough calories. So he eats a little less of those very low calorie density foods and eats a little more. You know, he has a big serve of rice or whatever grain we're eating that night. Tonight we had buckwheat. So you shift the average of calorie density a bit higher, you know, maybe reach for a few of those foods from the baked goods area, baked grains and a few nuts and seeds, and eat bigger portions of your starchy foods. But we always say with the nuts and seeds, don't go crazy. Even if you're trying to put on weight, or you've got a friend or family trying to put on weight, it's not a good idea to have a diet that's too high in fat. There's a range of reasons for that. So it's just the strategies for weight loss. We say do it in reverse if you're trying to gain weight. So rather than eat the low calorie density foods first, eat the higher ones and then sort of fill up on your very low ones. So make sure you get enough calories. Eat more from the yellow light area. And so that's pretty much it for now. And just, you know, eating whole food plant-based, this is just one example of someone who spent for a year ate whole food plant-based. There's a really nice movie called Unsupersize Me. I'm not sure, Denise, if you've watched this. It's just lovely. It's following her journey, Tracy Ryan, for a year, and how she loses 200 pounds. And we've got a weight management section on our website. And so this is links to some really good YouTube presentations. The one, if anyone's having trouble with resisting eating supper after dinner, highly recommend you watch Doug Lisle, The Cram Circuit. It's a brilliant explanation as to why we often, even when we've eaten till we're full of really good quality, you know, whole food plant-based meals, why half an hour later you're off searching for the chocolate or the ice cream or something like that. So it's absolutely great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and now get everyone back on the screen so I can see you. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask me questions.
It's on only her. Look at that. It's only the Indian woman. She started. Let me see. Jesus, let's see here.
I just had the most delicious meal.
Yeah.
For you later.
What did you eat?
It was actually we made some pumpkin soup with the skin on, and I put Dr. Greger's savoury dress, you know, the blend, savoury blend on it, and what else? We roasted it, and I told Ewen to put one of the silicone baking sheets over the top to keep the moisture in, and then while we were sitting in the class, some of the ladies over there, they went and blended it up, and it was delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Delicious. And then there was a salad that we made from, Ewen does a lot of environmental talks, and BioFarm gave her a big bag of microgreens, and we made this salad dressing out. It had a little bit of the Dr. Greger's date syrup, but it was mostly lemon juice. So it had like a teaspoon of the date syrup, and then it was mostly lemon juice and some of his herbs, and it was just a small quantity spread on those microgreens, and it was just delicious. And she made a dip out of fava beans, green peas, spring onions, and lemon juice with a bit of pepper. It was just, and I had that with some wholemeal bread.
You see, all the foods you've just mentioned, they're all low in calorie density. So, you know, it doesn't matter how much you eat. Yep.
So, thank you so much, Jenny. I don't know which one of you or Malcolm, which one gave the better class. I think it would be very hard to compare, and you just 6 stars each. So I just over to my student. I'm so glad that we had Jenny here tonight. She's helped to explain, she put it all in a nutshell, a low calorie nutshell, for everybody to see why it is that we have been promoting a whole food plant-based SOS, or whole food plant-based no oil diet, as the diet that helps to heal your body. Because if your body is, if you are taking way too many calories for what your body needs, And you're not
Look at
getting
the thing she wrote. Let's see. Do we have any specific evidence on?
Oops. Sweet.
Someone
So,
asking a question, or
I think it was Kuldeep. Kuldeep, you are actually, I'll unmute you. You need to unmute yourself, Kuldeep.
Yeah,
Oh, it wasn't us. It was someone else.
it was.
Okay. Malia? No?
It wasn't me, but I
Sivan?
do.
Yeah, go ahead and ask any questions while we've got Jenny here.
Okay, cool. I think for me, like, I don't know, this is like a revelation, if I may say, because like I said earlier on, like I've always been overweight and I actually went vegan, plant-based because I thought, I was gonna, lose weight just like that. And I thought I could eat anything as long as
it was vegan. Yeah.
it's not meat and it's not dairy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been almost like refined sugar free for quite some time now, but I'm just like, why am I not losing weight? Why am I not losing weight? And now I feel like the light has, I don't know, switched on. Yeah. So it's the calorie density thing. Cause I mean, I love rich things.
Also,
like
the other thing with Malia is, I'll ask Jenny to go over this, but she organises one-day seminars and also 1 week sort of workshops where you
immersion, retreat,
immersion programs where you just eat the food. And she will tell you that a lot of people who come into this program don't realise how much food you actually need to eat. And if you eat those green-like foods, and I have given you Dr. Greger's PDF book.
Yes,
you go through that PDF book and you focus on those green-like foods, you will find the weight dropping off you. And the more you eat, the more you will lose if you eat those green-like foods. It doesn't happen with the yellow ones, and it doesn't happen with the green ones. When you've achieved your ideal weight, then you can add more of the yellow light foods. But if you want to lose weight, it's the green light ones. Over to you, Jenny.
And well, the thing to do is to be kind to yourself. Now you have the understanding of calorie density, and to be kind to yourself in realizing that you in a sense your physiology has been tricked by the calorie density of the food in our modern food supply. And so, and you thinking that it was a good thing as long as it was vegan, it's like you didn't know this. And no, not many people know this. We're always really surprised when we hear from, in Australia, we've got some, nutrition experts that are on TV, they're not plant-based. And they don't understand calorie density either. It's like it's not well known. So, forgive yourself for not knowing, because very few people talk about it. And yet, it's once you understand it, it is so obvious that it's the key to making the right choices. And the other trick, because I've worked with many people who the problem when they try and eat whole food plant-based is that they've still got that mindset of small portions, and so they don't put enough on their plate, and they might have one good day, 2 good days. Oh yes, I ate these potatoes and these carrots and these beans and I'm so good. After a couple of days, if you're under eating by too many calories, that's when you're vulnerable. That's when you just want to hit the, if you're on the way home and there's a store where you want, you can buy something and get it in your mouth as fast as you can, because that's your biology. You're designed to do that. If you go back 10,000 years, if you came across that tree with walnuts on them, you would be like, that's fantastic. Eat as many as you can, because that's survival. We live in an environment where there's so much around, and it's really hard. So eat more of those low calorie dense foods.
Green light.
Yeah, green
light
light.
foods.
Yeah.
If it was possible for you to actually come to the centre and be there for one of our feasts, I have these 2 huge tables, and my students used to come, and the whole table was full of produce, and we'd turn it into food, and it was a huge amount. And my students were shocked at how much food they would eat, and they would feel satisfied but not sick, and they would keep on eating that, and they would lose so much weight.
Wow.
I mean, you know, every one of my students, the more they ate, the more they lost.
Yeah.
Sure. Wow. This is good. This is good news.
Yeah.
I like it when Malcolm is video bombing Jenny.
He is, isn't he? And he's wearing his orange glasses, his before bed glasses.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any more questions for Jenny and Malcolm in the background? Oh, the honey.
Funny.
Just very quickly, the honey, Jenny.
Well, there's a couple of things about honey. Some people in the vegan world stay away from honey because it's a food from, you know, from an animal. You know, it's, I won't go into describing what it is, but ethics aside, honey is very similar to any simple sugar. So whether it's just a teaspoon of table sugar, brown sugar, you know, raw sugar, maple syrup, honey, they're all the same. Keep them to a minimum. If you use those foods a lot, they're not going to help you in getting away from having that sweet tooth. And so
Pleasure trap.
Same with artificial sweeteners, or even things like, I don't know if you've heard of stevia, which is like a sweetener with no calories. And you think, oh yay, I can eat as much as I like, but it keeps you wanting sweet foods. And so that also then will keep you vulnerable, that if sweet foods are available, even if they have calories, you'll be eating them. So it's better to slowly get away from, you know, added sweetness. But having said that, a teaspoon of honey or a teaspoon of maple syrup, you know, in your salad as part of a dressing, or to make the porridge, the oatmeal taste good, that's fine. Like 1 teaspoon of sugar, let's say honey, any of those, it's going to be like about 20 calories, and it's no big deal. It's when you start to have foods that have half a cup, you know, a cup of, you know, sugar or sweetener added to a recipe, that it starts to get to be a problem.
And I just like to put in here, if you are actually trying to reverse certain diseases, the oil is more damaging than the actual adding of the sugar. So for example, if you're trying to reverse diabetes or heart disease, you know, and you happen to add like a teaspoon, as Jenny said, a teaspoon of some sort of sugary substance, whether it's maple syrup, date syrup, honey, or just raw sugar, to your porridge, okay, it's a lot less damaging than adding a teaspoon of butter or cream to your porridge. Because what will happen is, and you know, as you go through the course, you'll be exposed to other videos, which I really hope that you watch, because we have so many brilliant plant-based physicians and speakers, just like Jenny and Malcolm, and they will show you how eating a product that has oil in it will stop your body's ability to use the insulin to so that the energy actually gets to your muscles. Okay, so even the doctors will say, like Dr. McDougall will say, a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, it's okay, but the oils and the fats, stay away from them, because you actually don't need them. You won't notice them if they're not in your diet. If you happen to be someone who liked butter, then use nutritional yeast to get that buttery flavour, and a bit of aquafab to give a little bit of liquid, but you don't need the oil, okay? You won't actually miss it that much from a taste point of view. So the calorie density, you know, how much is a teaspoon of sugary substance, Jenny?
About 20 calories. About 20 calories, and oil's double that.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, and it does take time. I mean, Malcolm, Jenny, and I have been plant-based. Well, I've been plant-based nearly four decades, and so for me, I do remember what it was like eating, because I was brought up on a terrible diet, really. It's amazing that I survived. But the thing is that our taste buds have adjusted, but we are very aware that many of our clients, many of our students coming in, you're dealing with taste buds that have been hijacked by the pleasure trap foods for a very good reason. A lot of those pleasure trap foods are sold to us by companies who benefit from us being hooked on their food. They don't care that at the end of the day we end up with diabetes, heart disease, or you know, any sort of degenerative health disease. They don't care. Okay, maybe they lose a customer, but they'll get another one eventually. They're not too worried about that. But we are the ones that pay the consequences of our dietary choices. And you know, the CEO of McDonald's not going to be beside your bed as you're fading away, or you know, having your heart monitored, or getting prepped to go to theatre. He's not going to be there to sort of pat you on the hand and say, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry." He doesn't care.
And that CEO will have heart disease as well.
So at the end of the day, each one of us is responsible for our own health outcomes. But the good news is we're not alone. We don't have to be alone. And we don't have to be blinded by what is out there that is blatantly and obviously false. Okay, and it's part of our journey to educate ourselves. Yes, please, we've got a question.
Dennis, Jenny, and possibly Malcolm, I've lived with this tire for almost 20 years now. Now, is this possible? Can I get rid of this with moderate exercise and strictly sticking to plant-based diet? I'm a vegetarian, as I already told you. I'm a vegetarian. That doesn't mean anything because I've been eating dairy products. I've been, my wife has been generously adding so much oil in all these days, but not now. But do you think I'll be able to get rid of this beautiful tire I have?
How about, what is it? It is the 15th of May. We have Jenny, Malcolm, Malia, Silvana, and Kuldeep here. How about tonight after the class, you take some photographs, okay? And then decide if you're going to make a commitment, because I will be here for you, okay? If you decide to go 100% whole food, plant-based, no oil, or SOS free, I will be here for you, okay? And you see where you are in 2 weeks' time, 2 months' time, and 2 years' time, okay? And Malcolm and Jenny, do you believe that there will be a difference?
Yes. You can get rid of that tire that you've been carrying around for all that time, for sure.
I'm glad you've acknowledged that you do need to throw in a bit of exercise, not so much for the actual weight loss, but just for your overall metabolic health.
I'm a badminton player, and I play once or twice a week, and more recently than before. You know, when things fall in place, everything comes together.
Yes,
like you're following good diet, and then you're exercising and you're sweating. So recently, everything comes together, right? Everything is happening, but I'm not sure if I could really get rid of this tire. I'm a little bit skeptical about it.
Over to Malcolm.
The good news about abdominal fat is that it actually breaks down quite easily, but it also builds up quite easily. So every day that you're not adding to it, it's actually breaking down. In fact, that's one of the problems with abdominal fat, is that it keeps breaking down and releasing fat into the blood. And of course, the blood from that part of the body all goes straight to the liver. And you know, that affects the liver, makes it, you know, more towards diabetes, makes more, gives you a fatty liver, gives you high cholesterol. So that's the good news, that abdominal fat's always trying to break down. But of course, if you're always eating the fat-rich food, then you're always adding back to it again. I can imagine, you know, you get rid of the abdominal fat, but at some point you might want to do, you know, a few abdominal exercises, because, you know, the abdomen that's left behind might be a bit loose because it's inside fat suddenly gone away. But no, yeah, you can get rid of that abdominal fat. Yep.
Okay. Well, I know that there's two kinds of fats. One is the subcutaneous fat, and then there's the visceral fat. So which one do you think would be the first ones to go? And what could I do to get rid of this? I know that you would say that I need to stick, and Dennis is saying that, you know, from 2 months from now and 2 years from now, I could see my progress. But in your experience, you know, I'm throwing this question at everyone. Have you seen people go from a big, you know, tire to nothing at all, or, you know, something that's lean?
Sorry to interrupt. I know that question's directed at Malcolm and Jenny, but next week you're going to meet Spud Fit Andrew Taylor.
Oh, good. I was not going to show a picture of Spud Fit.
Spud Fit Andrew Taylor lost a huge amount of weight. I think it was 45 kilos.
No, he lost 53 kilograms.
Okay, and that was in a 1 year period, wasn't it, Malcolm?
Yes, yes. And he lost a little bit more after that.
Who was his plant-based doctor? Did he have one?
Yes, he came to see me. Yes, I was his plant-based doctor. That was his wife said, look, you can't eat just potatoes unless you have medical supervision.
Oh my God.
Can you see this? That was in 1 year. Eating as much potato as he wanted. That's Andrew Taylor a year later.
And he stayed like that. Actually, he got a little bit fitter and a little bit leaner in the following year. But yeah, he stayed that way. He diversified his diet from only potatoes to also including things like, you know, brown rice and beans and other vegetables and fruits. And he just continued to get healthier.
Okay.
So I'm just I've just got to confirm with Andrew what time he's going to be with us next Friday, but you have a whole hour. Andrew's going to probably show you those photos that Jenny's just shown you, but he's going to talk about his journey, but he is there for you to ask him questions. Okay.
And he has some very good insights into you know, food addiction and behavioral sort of things that you can do, and psychological things you can do to sort of help manage your tendency to eat the wrong kind of foods. So I think you'll find the wisdom and the insight that he's gained from that year are very helpful.
Because sometimes it can be challenging for students to take a look at people like Jenny, Malcolm and myself, because we are already we're very lean people, because we have been on this way of eating for what we call way of eating is WOE, W-O-E. This way of eating has been a part of our lifestyle for so long. It can sometimes get challenging for students and sort of look at us and say, well, you've never been fat. You don't know what it's like. But we have students, and, you know, it's clear that it works.
No, it's very, very good.
Don't take our word for it. Speak to the people who have done it.
No, it's great that you've got Andrew coming on, because it is something that we know when we do our immersions, that it means a lot to people to hear from others who've had a great success. Because yeah, sometimes we're just sort of not believed.
We lose credibility, right, because we stay lean and fit. Or people, I've always done a bit of running and quite a bit of exercise, and so I immediately lose credibility for weight management. It's like, yeah, but you exercise. Yes.
So we hear quite a lot about the body type. So there's like 3 or 4 different kinds of body type. And does that have anything to do with the food, the kind of food you eat, and how much weight you lose and all that?
You know, I think the main point there would be that yeah, some people are naturally more muscular than others. Some people naturally have, you know, longer, thinner limbs, for example, and different people have different ease with which their body stores fat, both individually and different ethnic groups. Like, you know, the Pacific Islanders, they put on weight very easily, but having the genes, the ethnic group that sort of makes it easier to gain weight doesn't mean that you have to gain weight. It just would make it easier. It would mean that, you know, if you ate a little bit more oil and a little bit more cheese, then you're going to put weight on really easily. Whereas there might be other people who would eat those same foods and they'd only gain a little bit of weight.
How can we increase our metabolism? Well, you would normally say that by eating a whole wheat plant-based food, your metabolism would automatically go up, and you start burning energy much faster. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't know how much I'd say much faster, but certainly when you're eating a fiber-rich, you know, low-fat plant-based diet, it seems the research suggests that you can eat more calories without gaining weight. And of course, the other way is to do some exercise. You have to do quite a lot to make much difference, but it can sort of augment and work in with the eating, you know. And we know the aerobic exercise sort of burns up calories while you're doing it, but actually doing some strength work, you know, some weights and things, and making your muscles bigger means that you burn more calories just at rest, because, you know, muscles sort of a fairly you know, wasteful tissue for burning calories.
Yeah, that's a good point, because next week we start looking at protein and proteinaholic. So we're moving up towards that phase, and people are quite surprised at how little protein we need for muscle mass. And also, if you're interested, I can get you information on how building muscle mass, i.e. doing weight resistance exercise and muscle building exercises, will speed up your whole overall metabolism. Because what happens is muscles consume more energy, whereas fat doesn't, you know. So
and can I ask you guys a question about eating out? What are your views on eating out? Do you guys eat out?
It's very hard to get a good meal out. Very hard. Your typical chef will always make food as, you know, like part of the thing that appeals to people is food being rich. And so a chef thinks they're doing a good job if they make some nice little tasty thing that's very rich. And what are they going to do to make it rich? They're going to use oils, they're going to use sugar, they're going to use salt. So it's very hard to find a place that will serve a meal that is anywhere near to the way we eat. Now, the interesting thing is, and I remember this, I mean, I've been eating this way for 10 years now, but I can remember in the early years, I could still go out with friends, you know, when I wasn't with Malcolm. I mean, I knew Malcolm, but, you know, I'd go out with friends and we'd go to a place where I'd eat a meal that would have some oil in it, and I could tolerate it. And then, but the cleaner my diet got, the worse it got, to the point that I would, if I ate an oily meal now out, I would feel sick. And the feeling would mean I wouldn't sleep that night. I might feel ill into the next day, and it's not worth it. So when we do go out now, it's like it's a bit annoying. You've got to say, well, you know, can you fix me
fruit salad?
I can see you've got potatoes on your menu. Can you just steam them for me? and give me a salad. No dressing, thank you, because you know the dressing is going to have oil in it.
Or put it on the side.
Yeah. And so it's a bit of a pain to do it, but we do, because I don't want to eat a meal that's going to make me feel unwell, and it will. Even just whilst I'm eating now, if something's a bit oily, it just doesn't sit, and you can feel like you've got a brick in your stomach, and it's not fun. And the good news is when that happens to you, you realise you're well on the way to good health, because if you know, if you keep having these meals every week, you won't notice it. But if you go for 3 months eating, you know, all the foods that Denise is teaching you to eat, and then you go out, and we see this in the Aussies group that I'm a moderator. Someone every few weeks, someone will say, "Oh, I went out on the weekend, you know, to my restaurant I used to go to, and I had this meal and I felt so sick. Could this really be a thing?" And we go, "Yep, it's a thing." Everyone's been through that, where what you ate and got away with and didn't notice really affects you when you clean up your diet. Same with the salt. The salt is something that, you know, I'm just really knocked out by salt now. Like I'm thirsty, I retain fluid, my blood pressure goes up, I get agitated. It's nasty. And yet 10 years ago I didn't have that problem, but I was obviously always in a high salt environment. You know, every day I had salt by eating, you know, food at the work cafe and that sort of thing. So
I think if I go out somewhere, I often try, and if I can, choose somewhere where they might be able to give me some steamed white rice without oil in the rice cooker. You know, I will eat white rice if I go out and not at home. If they'll do some vegetables without the oil. And I guess we have to remind ourselves about going out while we go out to eat. You know, you know, we don't have to do the dishes or the cooking. We're mainly going out for social reasons. And sometimes we even have a snack before we go out, so that you're not so hungry when you go out that you eat all the food that's not good for you. And so, yeah, you just have to remember the reason that you're going out as a social event, not necessarily for a great meal.
Yeah, because I'm finding that now I have to like think of creative ways to meet up with friends, maybe like go for a walk or do other things, because I'm just
make
like,
it like a morning coffee or something that's not around a meal, and don't be hungry when you go. You know, have a huge breakfast and go out for coffee, or have a huge lunch and go out for afternoon tea. And they might order some nice, you know, rich sweet things, and you can just think, oh, I can cope, you know, or maybe have fruit or something.
Take something with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know where you're going.
I make blueberry and banana muffins, and I have my banana and oat cookies, you know, and that's delicious. And that's fine.
Cookies in the handbag,
or
potatoes.
If I'm going to a large-scale catered event, then often I'll have potatoes with me in a little bag, and sometimes I've even been known to pull out a baked potato in its jacket while no one's looking and stick it onto my plate in among the salad or something. Bit harder at a restaurant. This is more a large event.
I'll just slip in here as well. What's going to happen in the last week, just towards the end of the 28-day program, which is actually only 13 days away. We look at plant-based communities and plant pods. And Jenny has spoken about these. And it is very lonely when you're a pioneer in this way of eating. But eventually what happens is you create friends and you find friends. And then getting together with friends, just as I have. My friends are over there. And my contribution, I have a tin of my chili beans that you saw me make last Saturday. And they blended it up and they made like a refried bean paste. And, you know, each one of my friends has made a plant-based meal that is compliant, and it's just so delightful. And that sort of thing will slowly replace, you know, going out to these fancy restaurants that cost a lot of money. and you don't actually get anything really nutritional for your money.
Yeah, yeah. In Australia, we're still quite isolated, dealing with COVID-19. But prior to that, we would have monthly potluck meetups, and we'd get 20 people, 25 people coming, and everyone would bring a dish to share. And we would say, after plating, going along the buffet and plating, putting stuff on our plate, we'd say, there is not a better restaurant in the whole of Melbourne than right here today, with all this delicious food that everyone's brought. So,
and I have to say, Malcolm and Jenny and I, we met each other at Doctors for Nutrition in February last year, and I have enjoyed so many lovely meals at their house. And they have eaten here in China at my centre. We have another friend, Peter Johnston, who I'm hoping that we can have at the very end of the course, that you can meet him. He's a plant-based dietitian, and he makes the most amazing pizza. I had pizza one day for lunch at his place, and I just took photos and just sent them everywhere to all my friends, but it was just absolutely delicious.
Oh, it's his black bean brownies that I think are delicious.
I haven't had those yet, but that's what I'm saying, is that it does take time, but it will happen, and we're growing a community. Next month we will have another 10 students starting with us, and I hope that you're as active as you are in this program. But it's not one of those things that you learn and that's the end of it. It evolves, isn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, we're going to have to go to bed now. It's our bedtime here in Melbourne.
That's fine. We'll end here. But this is the start of the beginning. We are halfway through the start.
Thank you very much.
And the most important thing is, it's the process, not the destination. The goal is the doing. What you eat every meal, day after day, that's what counts. Don't be too hung up on jumping on the scales too often. It's so long as you are eating these foods, your health will improve.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much, Jenny and Malcolm, and thank you everybody for attending. And
thank you.
I will have this video ready fairly soon for everybody else to watch. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.